Hi,
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. What about you?
I am very well also. Good to see you on here again after our little tech test yesterday.
Yeah, it's one of it's one of those things where even though you do a tech test, you're not sure if it's gonna pan out the next day. So
Every time I do these, I have the little period of time just beforehand where it's like a real adrenaline adrenaline rush. And I'm always really happy when it just works nicely like that. That was quite slick. So yeah,
do you
so
still
we'll
get nervous though when you do these live
a
things?
tiny bit, not much anymore actually. I definitely get more excited now. I look forward to it. Yeah, the downside now is less about the nerves and it's more about the fact I don't start till 8 o'clock in the evening here. So it's just that whole like by the time I finished and got myself sorted, I'm like, it's nearly bedtime. So, but I don't know. Do you know? I really enjoy it, and yeah, and yeah, the more I do it, the more sort of I practice, and the more fun it is. So, yes, it's good. And also, one
That's
thing that
good.
makes the pressure less actually is a lot of people in the group watch back on replay.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, I quite like it if. Of course, it's lovely when we have lots of people join, but also sometimes I do it live and I know it's only a small number, so I can just relax and have a chat with you. And
Yeah,
then
I know. Less
later,
pressure. I
it's
get
less
it. I
it's
get
less pressure, and then and then people can watch back, and it's all over with by then. So
it.
yeah, so
I
well,
can
so
relate.
just yeah, while people may well be I can see there's a couple of people joining, so I will let people come in, and please, if you are joining us, do say hello and introduce yourself in the comments. And while people are settling in and that's happening, Nick, um, I thought I'd just tell everybody how we met. So a thank you first of all to my friend here, Emily. Emily's a fellow HR leader and very kindly introduced me to a number of people when I moved to Singapore last year. And Nick was one of those people, and she said, "Do you know Nick?" And I said, "No, no, I don't." She said, "You need to." And so thank you to Emily for connecting us. And she said, "Oh, you should connect with Nick. He does this great podcast." So I went and found the podcast and listened to it, and we got in touch, and yeah, and we've got to know each other more over this last year. So thanks to Emily. Yeah, and so Nick, tell us a bit more about you, just sort of high level, a little bit, some facts about Nick.
Yeah, sure. And I guess I can tie it into the podcast or how I
Mm,
started that as well.
yeah.
And in relation to the topic, I
Mm,
guess. So I suppose for lack of a better way to describe it, I'm a pretty average Joe, I would say, but I think I did have a very significant experience as one might consider it, and that was that I went through clinical depression for 10
mhm,
or 11 years, almost
mhm,
there. And so ever since I overcame it, it was one of those things where I felt the need to pay it forward. Not so much because I really, cared about helping people, but it's more that I had that sense that I kind of owed it to all the people who helped me along the way. And there
mhm.
was never really a great way to pay them back. And
Yeah,
so I thought, okay, let's do the only possible thing, which was to pay it forward. So
yeah.
that's how I started Echo Academy in a nutshell. And even though Echo Academy kind of moved away from mental health per se, I've always been fascinated in hearing how other people deal with their challenges and
Mm,
their whatever, whatever that they may be going through, both good, bad, even the ugly, and how
mm,
they deal with it, because everyone has like a different lens they put on when they encounter various problems or challenges. And so
mm.
ever since then, because I was fascinated with it, I started the podcast. And even though it's evolved to more than the podcast, I think that was the genesis. I was
Yeah,
just interested in kind of figuring out how those guys do it, and
yeah,
kind of see how other people can learn from them. So
yeah.
that's
And when
top
did
level.
when did you start? When did you start it? How long have you been doing the podcast for now?
So November 2019, I think, was
Yeah.
when I first started. And it was one of those things where I really wanted to do it, but at the same time I knew like because I had a day job, I'm not going to spend too
Mhm.
much time. So what I did was like a kind of to make sure I would not give up halfway because I couldn't find
Mm.
guests, I recorded 10 in a row first
Yeah.
and then published it weekly. And so I had a 10-week buffer to find the next guest. And so ever since then, I was always ahead of the timeline. So that kind of helped bring that momentum forward.
Yeah.
And yeah, so since then,
Since then, oh, and then you've got all sorts of people like me just knocking at the door saying, "Hey,
I know, yeah.
let me in your podcast."
And that's
Yeah.
been wonderful, yeah.
Oh no, that's good. Well, and what we're going to be talking about today is you know, a little bit about what you've learned from some of those podcast guests. So I'm looking forward to hearing some more about that. Um,
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about sort of since you started the podcast in 2019. Tell me about how that journey, you know, how you found that and what the journey's been for you, how that's evolved during that time.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting one because the podcast was, I mean, the intention was, hey, I wanted to be seen. I wanted it to be a famous podcast. I wanted, like millions of viewers maybe at some point. But I think what happened over the course of the year, it's been slightly over a year since I've done it, is that over time, the reward is the people you interview and the insight you get from that. And slowly my goals for the podcast and my ambition for the podcast sort of changed changed because of it, because I was getting so much value for myself and I was able to learn so much from these people. It no longer became the metric of, trying to get more people, but
Yeah.
trying to get more interesting guests on the
Mm,
podcast, which
hmm.
can be a challenge because if you're a nobody, they're not going to be like waiting outside your door to be like, oh yeah, let me get on your podcast that gets like maybe 200 listens per episode. It's
Oh,
not like a big thing. But at the same time, you still, because you have a product, so to say,
mm,
so to speak, you can sell it to people, and because of that, you can punch above your weight and get,
mm,
CEOs. I even had Olympic athletes on the
mm,
podcast.
mm,
So I think that's one of the great things I've learned through this process, right? If you
mm.
have something to market, if you have something to sell, the people you meet will match the people you desire to meet. If not,
Yeah.
there's no real need for them to want to connect with you.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to tell you off though because you're not a nobody and you're not an average Joe,
Yeah.
so they're not true. But I know what you mean. That it's funny, isn't it? You kind of see podcasts like like Michelle Obama or Brené Brown,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh my gosh, And I think when you're a sort of I guess you like you say you've got a day job and you're doing this more as a kind of paying it forward because of your own experiences. You do need to have the different metrics because you'd just get depressed, wouldn't you, if you were just looking at your if you were just measuring success, your own success by something like a metric on viewer numbers or follower numbers or something. And yeah, that's probably not very helpful. But and you said the podcast evolved because when you started it, it was more from the mental health perspective. Is that right? And then it sort of evolved to be more career focused. Tell us a little bit about how that sort of changed.
Yeah. So the first iteration of the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, which didn't last more than 10 episodes, happened
Mm-hmm.
actually in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
2018 was when I officially no longer had to see my psychiatrist. I was
Mm-hmm.
officially off my medication. And so that was
Yeah.
like the genesis. I was like, all right, let's time to get my feet
Mm-hmm.
wet in paying it forward. And it started off me trying to tell the story of my mental health journey, what I
Mm-hmm.
learned through it, and also at the same time trying to suggest ways that people can think about their own mental health, not because they're suffering from anything per
Mm-hmm.
se, but more because of the need to preserve the sanity within yourself as the world gets crazier and crazier.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me that felt really draining because it kind of
Mm-hmm.
brought back all those memories I did well to forget.
Yeah.
And after I said I would do 10 episodes just to see what it would look like, and then I would
Mm.
make a decision. And so I made the decision after the 10th episode to be like, you know what? As much as I want to help others, I
Mhm.
don't don't care enough to help them at the detriment of
Yeah.
my time. And
Yeah,
so
they wouldn't want you to help them that much that you actually get on well again. No, for sure.
exactly. So I decided like, all right, we'll see what was happening. But then
Mm-hmm.
at the 2018 also, because like other stuff in my day job, I kind of put it in
Mm-hmm.
the back burner, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how in 2019 I saw this opportunity. I had stability in my life again. I was like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
let's revisit this,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and hence what it looks like now.
We were just now kicking off onto our main topic, which is the topic of stress, which of course right now is a very hot topic, and also I know it's something that's very close to your heart, Nick. So yeah, so tell us a bit about how you would define stress, what it is, and I guess what it's not as well.
Yeah. So I mean, I used to have my own versions of or own definitions of what stress might be, or
Mm-hmm.
what it is, what it isn't. But I think after I had a guest on the podcast who
Mm-hmm.
later on became a good friend of mine, Dr. Kwon Kim. He's a neuroscientist.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me a really good definition of stress, in not so much in the scientific way, but how we should think about
Mm-hmm.
it. And ever
Yeah.
since then, it's been grandfathered into my mind, and I kind of repeat it to other people. And so he
Mm-hmm.
said that stress is essentially stimulation, and the goal in life is not to eliminate stimulation. The goal in life is
Mm-hmm.
to get the right kind of stimulation and at the right
Mm-hmm.
amounts. And for me, that
Uh,
put stress in perspective, right? Because stress biologically was meant to serve a purpose, right?
mm-hmm.
It was almost a trigger for your flight or fight so that you can figure out what was the best way to do this. I'm no scientist, so I'm not going to elaborate too much into that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a good way for us to think about stress is, if we use Dr. Kwan's definition, is, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, imagine stress as you wanting to boil water, right? Like, let's say you want to drink tap water, but you're not sure if it's safe. So you fill up your pot or you fill up your kettle and you boil that water. And eventually it's going to boil and become water that you can drink. But if you leave it on
Mm-hmm.
the burner, it's going to evaporate. And then it almost defeats the purpose of why you boiled that water. So similarly,
Mm-hmm.
stress functions in that same way, right? You want to boil the water so that it serves the function of you wanting to quench your thirst.
Uh-huh.
Stress was meant for you to shut down certain parts of your mind and your body so that it can narrow its focus towards what it's trying to, and towards the stressor that is, in your life. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, ever since then, that's how I've been seeing it. And then from there,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of understand, if I'm stressed, what is my stressor? Is it real? Is it psychological? And so on and so forth.
Mm.
So I think that's a good
And what
definition starting point.
that it's a great definition, and it's a really interesting one. And I read something recently that was similar but different analogy, that it was almost we you sort of I think I for one had a perception that stress is like a bad thing, so we don't want stress, but actually that's not the case. It's you need an appropriate amount of stress, because without any stress you wouldn't have those sort of those goals. You wouldn't be working towards anything. You'd just be kind of bumbling around all the time. So it's that kind of having the right kind and the right amount that's going to be helpful and keep you productive, but not kind of going over the top. Because I guess if someone has the wrong or too much stress, what are some of the some of the sort of negative things that we could see?
Yeah. And I think maybe just before that, we can really break down, because oftentimes when we think
Mm,
about stress, and when we tell ourselves stress, we don't sort of segment it or dissect it into its relevant parts. And so
mm,
essentially, when you're feeling stressed, I mean, to simplify things, there are just 2 points to that, right? There's the stressor,
mm,
that's what causes the
yeah,
stress, and your stress
yeah.
response, right? So
Uh-huh.
oftentimes when you're feeling stress, it's important to separate those two so that you can define what each of those two things look like for you. What is it that's causing you that stress? What is that stressor in your life? and how are you reacting to it? You know, if, for example, let's say if you're stressed at work and you say, yeah, I'm feeling stressed, it's work, you never really figure out what the root cause is, and maybe you'll tell yourself, and you'll give yourself those dictionary definitions or dictionary answers where like, oh, maybe I'll just go for a massage, I'll go for a run. This is my way of de-stressing. But that's never a good or sustainable long-term way of thinking about it. Whenever you, for example, if we use the example of work, if you're feeling stressed at work, then it's important to ask yourself, what is the stressor at work? And how am I reacting to that stressor? And so then it just breaks things down small, just small enough for you to identify what it is and what you can do about it. So I think that's a better starting point than to kind of understand like what could cause it, because everyone kind of reacts in different ways, and it's hard for us to kind of understand what that is.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So it's really about us individually pinpointing those two things. So what's the cause, and then how are we responding?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And you know, at the moment, I guess you can only talk from personal experience, but given sort of the last year and everything that we've been through, and you know, and in some places, you know, around the world are still very much continuing to go through. Are you seeing, either for yourself or for sort of people you're talking to, are you finding that people's stress levels are different at the moment? Are they finding more things are sort of causing that stress response?
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID is just a fascinating case study in how the world reacts to stressors, right? Because there are two different types of stress, right? There's the acute stress and the chronic stress. You know, the acute stress will come and go. And, you know, once there's the end to the stressor, you know, for example, if you're no longer stressed at work, that's the end, right? You're no longer feeling stressed. If the stressor is gone, you're no longer stressed. The difference with COVID is that the stress is chronic because you're psychologically inclined to think about the fact that you don't know when it will end. You don't know when I mean, for your viewers in the UK, you might not know when the lockdown will end, whether things will get
Yeah.
better. I mean, for those who have family members in a different country that they cannot travel to, these things compound. But the compounding is one aspect of it. But the fact that you don't know when that compounding effect will then subside adds to the fact that your stress can never really go away. And I think that's what we're all seeing, right? Because COVID doesn't give us that expiry date.
I wish it would.
Yeah, I wish it would. Yeah, you know, and hopefully the
Yeah,
vaccines
I
provide
know.
that little bit of comfort.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, but no, you're right. It's that kind of, and it's that longevity as well, isn't it? It's been for such a period of time, as well as that unknown finish. No, it's interesting. So tell us, you know, your podcast. You've had, I've been on myself, and obviously because of that I kind of got to know you, and I've listened to lots of your different episodes, and there's some fantastic and very varied people on there,
Yeah.
and some great, you know, some great individuals. When you look back at that journey, what are some of the key things that you've learned from those guests? You sort of said, you know, that's been a real takeaway for you, you know, learning from those people. So can you share with us some of your main learnings? And I guess particularly in relation to this, you know, this field of kind of stress and managing, you know, managing your stress.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the things that I really, in a way, to sum up what I've learned from all my guests, is the fact that we're all uniquely common. You know, we're very, when it boils down to it, we're all pretty much the same type of people. We feel the same things. We react the same way. Humans will be humans. But I think the thing that's unique about us is that we experience it in different ways, because we always add a lens, whether whether it's biased, objective, you know, however you choose to see that lens, it adds a different perspective to the same situation, right? And so
Yeah.
what's fascinating about that is the fact that now, because of that, we all experience the same things, but we take away different things. And because of that, you know, the knowledge becomes richer, because we find more ways to deal with the same problem. And because of that, in future, more people will get to find new ways to deal with a problem that they never knew existed. So I think that's one of the great things that I've learned. But more specifically, there are five real life lessons that I've kind of taken away from some.
Fabulous.
The first one I have is by a guest of mine. Her name is Alison Carr. Maybe I mean, because you know your expat community is pretty close knit. Maybe you might know her. She works in HR at a Japanese investment bank. I'm not sure if she still does.
Okay.
And she's British, just like you. And
is she?
so you know, who knows?
I'll check her out.
Yeah. You never know. Might be someone worth getting to know. But and I asked her this question. It's the first few podcasts I asked this question to all my guests, and it was, what would the Alison of today tell the Alison of 20 years ago for her to make better decisions? But her response was very different from all the other responses in that she said, I would actually turn that question on its head and say, what would the Alison of 20 years ago tell the Alison of today? And her answer was, I would challenge her to take the same amount of risks that she did when she was younger, because the opportunity she got from the risks that she took was made her life more enriching. And because now she's playing it safe, you know, she doesn't have access to that same level of opportunity. And I thought that was good. You know, it's a good way for us to reflect on what were some of the good things our younger selves did that we have forgotten or we've let go of, that we can bring back. I thought that was a good one.
Oh, that is really good, and it's a great way to think about it, isn't it? Sort of thinking about it the other way round. I'm gonna after this session, I'm gonna have a reflect on that one, and
you should.
what would my 20 years ago self say? Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
cool. Thank you. And what's your second life lesson?
So the second one was she was an Olympic mountain biker. Her name is Alexandra Yen. She represented Hong Kong in mountain biking, and she did it for a small period of time professionally as well. And one of the things she said that really stood out, because I think it kind of encompasses everyone's life journey, even though it's more relevant to sports, is that when she went from amateur to professional, you know, so i.e. from like 15% of performance to like maybe for like 80% of her potential, those changes were very obvious and very quick, right? You know, from her being a weekend warrior mountain biker to making it to the Hong Kong team, those changes were obvious. You know, you could really see your progress. But then the progress becomes fewer and further apart as you get much better. So from professional to podium finish, those changes are, you know, 1 second difference, millisecond difference. And it takes a really long time, and you don't know if you're on the right path, because you know, you only really figure that out at your next race day, your next competition day. And it's during those times where you have to appreciate the fact that because you are much better at what you're doing, the rewards are further away, but the rewards are much better. And during that process, you must trust that process and be patient, because you're not going to see it as quickly as you did when you were a nobody trying to become somebody. And I think that's a beautiful life lesson.
Yeah. It's like being pleased with the tiny increments, isn't it? Rather than just the like, but that's hard. That's hard if you're not particularly patient, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's what she said about it. She says like patience will take time, but during that period where you're struggling and you're not sure, it's the process that you have to be comfortable with, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, you're like, this is going nowhere, I'm not seeing anything. And then come race day, maybe you don't finish top 3, but you improve and you get a personal best, right? And then you're like,
Yeah.
wow, suddenly you see it. And then when you reflect back, you're like, oh, it's the process that got me here. So it's kind of bringing
Yeah.
it back and saying, the process will get me there. Be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess being comfortable as well with celebrating those little wins, which actually all add up to the big ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, fabulous. Excellent. And who was your third life
The
lesson
third
from?
one was Paul Gilmartin. He's an American
Uh-huh.
stand-up comedian. And
Oh.
yeah, I mean, I connected with him because he hosts a podcast called The Mental Pod, and it's basically about mental health issues and stuff like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so he's interviewed some pretty famous people. If you want to check out his
Mm-hmm.
podcast for your viewers, it's Mental Pod.
Yeah.
It's on Spotify and
Mm-hmm.
iTunes and stuff.
Yeah.
And what he said was, and I suppose this is pretty obvious in the sense that we all know it, but I think I want to
Mm-hmm.
bring it up again because it's worth reminding ourselves. But
Mm-hmm.
when I asked him the question of what life lesson took him the longest to learn, and he told
Mm-hmm.
me that I think over time I realized that the process of growth is not so much about acquiring more knowledge, but it's about letting go of the knowledge that I currently possess. And
Oh.
and I thought that was very profound because, I think that was his battle, that was his cross to bear when he was going through alcoholism, depression, and
Mm.
stuff like that. He needed to realize that, the things he was learning to cope were actually to his
Mm.
detriment, and he had to let go of that. And so that was a great learning
Yeah.
lesson even for me.
Yeah, that's that, and I think I've heard you talking about that one either on the podcast itself, or I think you might have done a recap on it, and I was like, whoa,
Yeah,
yeah, that's yeah, it's like again a different way to think about something, isn't it? It's like people think about development about just like learn like doing different things and acquiring skills, and yeah, gosh. That's a good one.
yeah,
Thank you, Nick.
yeah.
And yeah, and what's your next one?
So the fourth one, I guess it's not really relevant to stress or the current, or maybe it's relevant to the current the times
Uh-huh.
we live in, right? And I think
Mm,
the time we're dealing in a period of immense misinformation and disinformation.
mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was laid bare for the whole world to see as it culminated with the Capitol Hill riots, right? And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that I spoke with my guest Breeze, and he is the managing director of a disinformation software tracker. So it kind of tracks
Mm-hmm.
disinformation as it travels through the internet. And he says, like,
Oh.
it becomes increasingly hard to understand where the misinformation is. And oftentimes the best solution is to be the one person we don't want to be. And that is to question our own beliefs when we get consumed in our echo chamber that constantly supports it.
Mm,
And I think even you don't even need to politicize it, right? Even the things that we hold to be true, whether it's at the workplace or in life, everyone says like, hey, um, I don't know, exercising is good, for example. Yeah, broadly we
mm-hmm.
know
Mm-hmm.
that's true, but that doesn't mean you need to be doing high intensity for all the time, right? And so we
Mm,
we
mm,
we kind of serve ourselves with the information we want to be true so that we can solve a problem.
mm-hmm.
But oftentimes we also need to play that devil's advocate just to make sure we're on the right track.
That's a really good point, and particularly around the echo chamber, because I think particularly at times when there's big political, whether it's an election or in the UK obviously Brexit was well, say it's not long ago, it's a long time ago, but it's still ongoing.
Yeah.
And and actually when you're sort of reading your Facebook or your Twitter, whatever it is, there's absolutely that thing, isn't there, where you sort of, if it's people you like and trust, you sort of just make an assumption that it must be factually correct. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that technology sounds extremely clever.
Well,
Very, very techy.
I mean, it'll always be an uphill battle, but it's.
Mm,
I think it's one of those things where we
mm,
as a crowd, it's not so much that we have to be more discerning, but I think
mm,
it's more the fact that we need to appreciate that there's no rush to share information. Like, like just because
mm,
something riles us up and we're like, this is terrible,
mm.
is in essence actually isn't a good reason to be sharing that information.
Yeah,
You are not
yeah,
you are not doing any due diligence, neither is anyone else. So why
yeah,
rush it? This information will be available in 2 weeks' time. Take your time to figure
yeah,
out if this is worth
yeah.
sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, almost that kind of take time to just pause and reflect before you actually spring into action and do, that kind of hit the sort of share button. And yeah,
Exactly.
it's yeah, great life lesson.
Yeah.
Fabulous. And what's number 5,
Yeah.
your final life lesson?
The final one is one of my favorites because I've always been fascinated about making difficult decisions. And so this was a
Mm,
guest of mine, Matthew Gerardo. He's a life coach as well. And we had a conversation
mhm,
about making good decisions. And I think what came out of that was just our understanding that making a good decision is not predicated on the outcome that you want. What's more important, I think, when you're dealing with so much gray subject matter, or the fact that you don't have all the relevant information to be making decisions, is your decision aligned with the values you hold true? And do you
mhm,
have a process to get to that decision where you can tell yourself, regardless of the outcome, I'm happy with what I've done to get to this decision?
mhm,
And I thought
mhm,
that's really good because more often than not, we deal in a world that is so complicated, whether that's a good
mhm,
thing or not, I'm not sure. But with that complication requires a little bit of acceptance that you won't get the
mhm,
outcome you want all the time. But
mhm.
that's not to say that you can't make the decision that you will be proud of 100% of the time. And so I think that's something that I found pretty valuable as well.
Yeah, so it's so true, isn't it? That kind of just keeping in mind the things that are most important to you and that you stand for. Because if you do deviate from those in decision making, it's usually a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. That 5 great life lessons, and if people watching want to get more, there's so many fabulous podcasts in the Echo Academy series. So Nick, tell us where people can go if they would like to listen to either the ones you just mentioned or any
Mhm.
of the others. Yeah, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the podcast is on Spotify, iTunes,
Hmm.
Google,
Hmm.
pretty much anywhere you can
All,
find the podcast.
yeah,
And Echo is
yeah.
spelled with a K, so EKHO.
Hmm.
So the Echo Academy podcast. So Echo Academy. Yeah, that's the
That's fab.
easiest way. I'm in the process of recording a new season and the theme is really on the people who've taken the road less traveled, and to kind of and to
Ah.
kind of well, number one, celebrate those people because they are not
Hmm.
common, but also to see what we can learn from the people who in spite of their fears and their apprehension decided to do the things that they wanted to do.
Oh, it sounds great. So what sort of things have you got? What sort of things have people done in their road less traveled?
Yeah, so I'm interviewing a few people who travel the world, like
Oh,
one who did a flightless journey, where he
oh wow.
basically hitchhiked or walked from Singapore all the way to Canada.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, yeah, and some other people could be someone who um, had had his life made in a sense where, you know, he was called to the bar, he was a practicing lawyer, but then he decided to take a risk and be like, hey, I'm gonna just join this startup because I believe in the cause, and you know, to kind of just to understand what it means to have that opportunity cost and to deal with that kind of conundrum, because I think more and more we
Oh,
might face that as well.
definitely. Oh, they sound brilliant.
Yeah.
I shall look forward to watching the next series. And also, I've recently started following you on YouTube as well, and that's been great because I've been seeing more kind of little snippets of
Yeah.
different kind of sound bites as well. So I definitely would recommend that to everyone as well. So what I'll do in a moment when we've finished, I'll share this recording, but I'll also pop some links below so you can sort of go on and check Nick's work out when you're watching this back. Super. Well, thank you so much for your time
Thank
and
you.
for your thoughts and insights, Nick. It's been lovely. It's been lovely to hang out with you and to hear a little bit more. And yes, we will enjoy watching some more of the clips and listening to the podcast as well.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun, you know. Maybe we'll do it again.
Oh, it's been good, definitely. And in the meantime, we'll meet up at WeWork.
You know where to find me.
Cool, thank you. I do indeed, in front of your giant pineapple.
Yes.
Oh, have a good evening,
You
Nick.
too,
Thank you so
Ellie.
much. Take care. Bye,
Bye.
everybody. See you next time. Bye.